Is it time for a new heating and cooling system? Turn to the experts at Griffith Energy Services and Carrier today and get 0% financing for 18 months on a new heating and cooling system. Get the comfort you deserve from Griffith Energy Services and Carrier. Visit griffithenergyservices.com today for this and other exclusive offers. That's griffithenergyservices.com. License number MDHVACR 01-2278.
Griffith Energy Services. Doggone dependable.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's recording for Deus Inte, God in You. And today we have a special guest, my brother. He's here because I've been a personal witness to how he's grown. He's worked with Accenture. He's also worked with Delta Airlines. He has a law practice as an entrepreneur. He's been able to build this practice. It's about 7 years plus now. Am I right?
Yes, about 7 years.
Yes, and he's been able to build this law practice. It's in the United States, in Omaha, Nebraska. They work with personal injury, workers' compensation, elderly law, juvenile and family law, and general business litigation. And he's achieved so much success in the years that he's been working. And as an entrepreneur, I find that incredible. So it's not just about family. It's about a person who has set an ideal in a country where he didn't grow up and has achieved success through that ideal. And this is what this show is all about. It's just talking through how do we set goals according to the picture that we have in our mind. How do we live the ideal life? And I believe he's living an ideal life. He's got a wonderful family. He's on the show today. And of course, I have my very good friend, Uche. She is calling in from Austria, as always, with great insights. So we're looking forward to a great conversation today around this topic. So, Gina, would you like to just give us a brief introduction of what you do and how it is you came about the ideal picture that is manifesting in your life right now?
Okay. Thanks a lot, G. Before I get to answering the question, this is a great surprise. You know, the concept of this program is actually a surprise to me. I just found out that she, who is my sister, had embarked on this journey of this program with her very good friend, Uche, who I also have a history with. We essentially grew up together in Nigeria. And this is a pleasant surprise, and I'm really glad to be part of this.
Thank you.
Now,
to have you on here.
Right, thanks.
Hi, I'm Uche. I just came in,
The first thing is, I wouldn't necessarily say that one is living an ideal life. What I would say is that one is constantly striving to achieve that ideal life. Now, there's nothing wrong with constantly striving. People may look at the term constantly striving as a negative term, right? But to me, it is not a negative term because the whole point of life is to strive for the ideal. Think about it. If one were to say, I have achieved the ideal, then there wouldn't be anything else to do. It would lead to a state of dissatisfaction. So striving is not a negative thing. Striving, when viewed positively, becomes a positive thing and becomes an aim for life. That's just my own personal philosophy of things. So in that vein, what I've tried to do, either consciously or unconsciously in my life, is to set goals, dream about things, and try as much as possible to work towards those things that I dream about. Now, it's very important to note that those dreams change, right? And that's that, society expects one to set a target and strive for that target and that target only. That theoretically may be true, but we all know that practically life doesn't work like that, right? Our targets change, our dreams change, and the results we achieve change. Sometimes the results we achieve may not necessarily be the results that we set off trying to achieve. But in the background of all of this is that constant striving, which should always be viewed positively. So that constant positive striving. One thing that I've talked about with Chinwe, which is to always be joyful in the process of striving, which is actually a new thing that I've come to, and I'm trying to train myself to be joyful in the process of striving. So I know I'm kind of all over the place, in this introduction, but that's that's kind of the where I am right now, and hopefully it's a good introduction.
Yeah, I think one thing that Uche and I agreed with is that this would be like a fireside chat. So it's like, friends coming together and sharing. A lot of that has been taken away by our busy lifestyles. And so, it's fine, just wherever the spirit leads, just go through it. And it's very interesting. There are some key words you mentioned here. There's the dreaming and the joy in working towards, whatever you're evolving towards. This is something that we've talked about a lot, Uche and I, about the concept of dreaming. So can you share with us how you came about with these dreams? Because it wasn't, I'm not sure it was where you started with when you left Nigeria. I mentioned that my brother left Nigeria when he was quite young to get a master's in Creating University. What informed where you are right now, and how did the dreaming process evolve to where you are?
Right. I think that I've always been somewhat impractical. If you remember, at a very early age, I found my entertainment mostly in reading. In reading fantasy and science fiction.
That's right.
So some people tend to be more practical than others. I haven't always been necessarily a practical person, right? I term myself somewhat idealistic and, with a tendency to fantasize. Growing up, there are positive aspects of that and negative aspects of that, especially in a country like Nigeria and being Igbo and our culture. We're raised to be hardworking and as practical as possible, right? Because of that, growing up, I tended to keep my fantasies to myself because, you didn't want to expose yourself too much and, be ridiculed.
Right.
But what did happen, though, was by keeping those fantasies to myself, I really developed the capacity to live within myself, to live within my head. And part of living within my head was being able to systematically think through a process that didn't exist in reality, right? So, for instance, coming to America, it started when I was in youth service. I remember raising the question with my mom. In my dreaming, my mom has always kind of played the role of a facilitator. Whether she knows it or not, but she has, in my life, she has always played that role. So I remember raising this with my mom and thinking it impractical, right? It wasn't obvious to me how my parents would be able to afford an education in the United States. It wasn't obvious to me that my dad would let me come to the United States. It just wasn't a practical thing, right?
Right.
What we did at that time was you graduate from school, you find a job, you find a wife, and you start trying to make a life. And here I was with this suggestion that maybe I should go to the United States and seek a life. And I remember at that time, my dad is a very practical man, and his approach was, well, what would you, I'm not necessarily saying no, but what would you go to the United States to do, right?
Right.
Were you just going to try your luck at something? What is the plan, right? And I didn't have a plan, quite frankly. All I saw in my mind was the United States is the center of the world. Everything happens there. And in this lifetime, in this epoch of time, I would like to be somewhere in the center of the world and part of everything happening in the world. It didn't make sense, but that was my motivation. So my mom, like I said, she was the one of my parents that did not poo-poo the idea. She thought it made sense, even though it didn't make sense to me or to anybody else. And so she encouraged me. She said, well, if this is what you want, then take a step towards it. And you see, that's the thing with dreaming is you dream and then no matter how impractical the step is, you have to take a step towards the dream. So I took a step, which was obtaining applications to universities all over the United States, universities in places that I never heard of, and just applying, And predictably, most of them turned me down. I found out I had to take the GMAT, the TOEFL exam, and I didn't necessarily perform very well in those exams. I think I did averagely. So, the ones who were interested would ask the question of, so what about your finances? How do you intend to pay for this education? And since my dad wasn't behind me, I didn't have anything to show for how I intended to pay for this education. So most of them turned me down. It didn't seem a reasonable thing. But again, my mom kept pushing. When I would be despondent, she would say, look, just take it a step at a time. You're applying, you're getting turned down. Keep applying until you actually get someone to accept you, or you get someone to actually give you something positive, and then work on that positive. And that's what I did. Quite frankly, the only university that he eventually accepted and wrote back and said, well, show us that you have X amount of dollars. Your GMAT is not stellar, but, we're willing to make accommodations for you. So it was something positive, and it was Creighton University in Nebraska.
Right.
What I'm trying to illustrate is something impractical becomes doable because you take a step towards it, and even though you meet with disappointment, you keep taking steps towards it until disappointment turns into even a little glimmer of hope, and then you grab on that little glimmer of hope and you keep working towards something, and it turned into a possibility. I don't know how my mom, again, was able to convince my dad to pay for the first year of education. And when I get to the United States, I would figure the rest out myself.
Wow.
And that's what happened. So I jumped a lot of things that happened in between. But long story short, the dream went from, quite frankly, just a concept to my eventually landing in the United States and to where I am today.
Wow.
I understand exactly what you mean. The fact that you said you were impractical and a dreamer, I connect to that part too. And the ability to turn that practical dreaming, because that's the key part. It's the imagination. In your imagination, you're creating. I'm emphasizing one of the parts that sticks out to me. You were able to create a concept in your mind first, and then you just take steps, and people and situations just sort of melt into the direction that you're going, even if you meet disappointment. That's the creative part of it, because you step outside what is supposed to be normal and you create something in your mind, and then steps turn up. One step forward. You don't need to know more than one step. You just take one step. You need to take one step at a time. So it's excellent. That stood out.
Exactly.
I just came in for that.
And that's the key. I think we're all constantly still learning, right? Like you said, you don't need to know more than the next step. Really, that's really what it comes down to. And as human beings, we all have this concept in our minds, and we're focused on the end product. And that's just who we are, right? That's what we're all trying to learn. And it's easier said than done. But the truth is, if you look back at anything that you've achieved, the truth is, anything big, I should say, anything big, and all of us have achieved something big, but don't need to know more than the next step at any point in time.
Exactly. So you were saying something else that stuck out to me. So go on.
I kind of lost my train.
Yeah, I asked how, first of all, you came up with where you are now, because obviously it went from dream to dream to dream. So the initial dream, which you've touched on, is I just want to go to the States. I want to be in the center of it all. And that happened. And I'm sure that gave you a lot of confidence to now go, okay, here's what I want to do. And here's what I want to. So it's so great to have someone who's been through these stages of dreaming and achieving, because it gives people hope and confidence that these principles actually work, because the principle is out there. Are you applying it is another thing. And when you apply it, how does it actually pan out? Because it's not as simple as you dream, you believe, it works, right? There are these little twists and turns, and sharing your experience is so valuable. And so, so that was my question, really. How did it now evolve to where you are now?
Well, here's the thing. What I really believe is that every single one of us is actually living that process that you just outlined, right? So the process of conceptualizing something, thinking it through, taking steps towards it, and actually manifesting something, actually materializing. The difference is that and this is just my own anecdotal, observation, but I would think that majority of us don't realize that that's what we're doing. I've come to the conclusion that that's what life is, right? I remember once when we were talking, we kind of talked about there's nothing that exists on this earth that didn't start as an idea. People don't, it seems a very, trite thing to say, but it's the truth, right? I mean, we take things for granted. We take things as simple as, cooking a pot of soup, right?
Right.
Somebody had to conceptualize the concept of putting onions and tomatoes and salt and boiling it for just so long and adding meat. Just happened.
Right.
So every single thing we do, even the mundane things that we take for granted, started as a concept somewhere. And somebody applied that concept and worked towards that concept and it materialized, right? So that's what we do as human beings. We live this process every day. The question, though, is, and that bears examining, is the fact that I would say majority, 90%, well, I can't put a number to it, but I would say most human beings don't realize that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Most human beings react to the creative process instead of actually affirmatively controlling the creative process. And I think that part of becoming who you truly were meant created to be, I believe that God created every single one of us with specific talents, right? I think that the process of becoming who you were created to be is the process of realizing how to control that creative process. That's what I think. We're all on that journey. That's why the striving is a continuous thing. And we're all hopefully figuring out ways to control our creative abilities. I think that's really what the human spirit is.
It's so interesting. And Uche, after I speak, I'd love for you to jump in, because we've also come to that conclusion that that as human beings, when we're growing up, we're picking up stuff all around us, and then we're always unconsciously creating, because that's who we are. We are creators by, so whether we are aware that we are actually creating our reality or not, it's happening. And we completely agree. I think that where you start working towards that ideal is when you begin to ask the questions, how can I consciously, and that's the word, now create my reality? And I love the word you used. You said most of us react. And that's so key, that the creation of an ideal or a dream, reacting is really not a good idea, because reacting is recreating, affirming what you're seeing. But the Bible says that if you're asking for something, first of all, believe that thing, right? Which is usually contrary to what you're seeing. If it's telling you to believe it, well, if it's apparent, if you can smell it, touch it, taste it, well, you don't have to believe it. It's right there in front of you. So if it's asking you to believe something, that means that thing isn't what you're actually seeing. And so the reaction recreates the past or your present, but the responding, the affirming of your belief, the staying steadfast in your belief creates a different reality. It now creates along the paths of what you actually want. And that's where the magic begins to happen and deep satisfaction comes in. But I paused you a little bit.
Right. And I think there's steps to it, right? One of the things that I noticed that started happening to me is and sometimes I think part of the process is the reactions, the negative things that happen to you in life. I think they're designed to force you to think, to start figuring out ways to control the process. I really think that's what they're for. So negative things are not, nobody likes negative things happening to them. But I think that's what negative things in life are for. Because one of the first times that I sat down and thought to myself, how can I change things around me, was in the middle of something very negative that happened to me. So I'd been in the United States for a while. I'd worked a couple of places. I was a young man, and I really didn't think, just like everybody else, I was reacting to things around me. I had the same dreams as everybody. Make money and all of that stuff. But I always found it easy to get good jobs. I would always get a good job in a great organization, but invariably at a certain point, something negative would happen at the job or between me and superiors, or the plan that I had laid out for myself would suddenly not materialize, and I would find myself having to start again from the beginning. And it happened once too often, and it was at that time that I started asking myself, okay, where is the problem? Is the problem with me? Is the problem with my decision making? What exactly is going on here? And it was then that I discovered meditation. It was then that I discovered living in the moment. First of all, determining who you are at every point in time, and then starting from there. And when I discovered meditation, that is a key part of what my life is now, and it formed the bedrock of, I think, my starting to take control of my life and my process.
Wow.
Yes, I completely agree with you with meditation, because once I started meditation, the mind starts to quiet, so you can actually be present in the moment.
Right.
And the more you meditate, constantly, the more the mind quiets, and you start for the first time to see more clearly your reactions. And without that space of meditation, at least I'm talking from my own experience, and I think I started meditating last year. I think it was early last year. And that's because once the mind starts to quiet, then you can see the patterns more clearly. But when you're in the midst and my mind is too busy, then you don't see, there's no space for you to actually decide consciously what you want to do, and start the journey of building exactly an ideal that you want and meeting it. And when you said earlier about finding joy in the process, I connected to that too, because I came to that realization that in the midst of it, there's always going to, because you're moving from one point to the next point. And when you're changing an ideal, you're moving from your current circumstance to another one. And in the middle of it, it's not going to be a clear path. That's not how it works. It's going to be misty, and it's going to be there are going to be obstacles and things come up. But in that process, you have to stay joyful, stay in that, because if you get distracted by your emotions, at least even if you get distracted by your emotions momentarily, then you can always go back and continue, because for you to get to that point, you have to keep your eye on the end goal.
Yeah, we call stay in the creation. Remember, we said stay.
Exactly.
Yeah. But go ahead. Yes.
That's what I mean. Staying in the creating, and not being in you out of the moment. So once you're out of the moment, then because once you shift out of that moment, you suddenly start to think of more and more things going wrong. You start to feel worse, and even your mind gets plugged. You can't see anymore. If your eyes on the ball and things are going, and you're in a better space of your emotions, then you can see step after step after step, even if at least one step forward, even if nothing, you see, okay, today I'm still fine. But if you go off and then it's a whirlwind of things, and then you start to see things that are going wrong. So I'm very excited by what you've said so far. The words connect to something that I have also experienced and I'm experiencing.
Right. And one thing I've learned, I'm actually in very early stages of the figuring out the importance of joy in what you're doing, right? Because I just recently came, and I think everybody who is introspective does this, has conversations with themselves, and you ask yourself, what actually motivates most of your decisions in life? And I find that, and I think this is true too for most people, I find that for the most part, our decisions are motivated by anxiety and fear. Right? I mean, it's very rare for human beings to make critical decisions about life from a place of joy, which is wrong. A lot of times when we're, making that decision about whether to buy a new home or buy a new car or take a new job or get married, the critical decisions of life, the thought process usually goes, okay, I want this. Can I afford it? How can I make this work? We quickly go from the target, which is I want this, to the anxiety, which is can I afford this? How do I make this work? And there's nothing wrong with the practical thinking, right? But if you allow the fear and the anxiety of do I have enough money? How am I going to make this work? Am I considering all the things that could go wrong? If I spend X amount of dollars on this, would I have enough to feed the kids? And if we allow, and these are the correct questions to ask, but the key is, are you asking those questions from a place of calmness and a place of practicality, or are you asking those questions from a place of fear and anxiety? And at least for me, I find that my habit, has always been to ask those questions from a place of fear, right? And if you ask those questions from a place of fear, then you will react to the fear, because fear is a very powerful emotion. You will react to the fear and make the decision from that place of fear. So what I'm trying to unlearn is that process of defaulting to making the fear and anxiety-based decision, learning how to make the joy-based decision. And it's very hard because, the habit has been to go to make that decision from a place of fear. Yeah.
Right. I just want to come in here and please hold the thought, because I love where this conversation is going. And I always screen every concept, and this what you're describing is really a concept that a lot of truth seekers have come upon. Actually, very, very biblical. And I do this because some of the terms that we're using now, meditation and all that, it's scary for a lot of Christians. We don't. These are structures in the Bible. They are principles which exist in the Bible, and I love to point them out. And what you've just described is the Bible verse, Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. And it says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you eat or drink, or about your body, what you wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? And passages like that, we would read, I would read it, and then I'd say, how do you say that to someone? Don't worry about okay, I'm not going to worry. I won't pay my bills. I won't, try that for 2 weeks, right? And see where that gets you, right? But that's not really what the Bible is saying. It's saying exactly what you're saying, that when you have a dream, just dream it. Don't worry about how do I get the money? Oh, this, oh, that. Will my boss like it? My wife, all these things are actually killing the dream that you've created, because we know that creation starts from the imagination. We've talked about this. Everything starts from an idea, something, a concept in your mind that whether it exists or does not, but it's in your mind first that it starts. It's given birth. But if you use fear and anxiety, it actually, what you're doing is actually killing it. And then you're going to circle back. So it's like you have a dream, you kill it. Have a dream, you kill it, until you finally learn to stay, as Uche said, in the creating. And what that is in those moments of meditation, don't dilute the meditation with worry or anxiety. Just dream about the thing. I want a house. Okay. In your mind, begin to furnish that house. What's it going to look like? What's the garden going to look like? For the pleasure of it, imagine your desire. And it doesn't even take 10, 15 minutes. And like we've all witnessed, as you stay in that thing, as you meditate and meditate in that thing, even in your waking moments, you can close your eyes for 5 minutes. When something, maybe you go to the bank and the bank is saying, oh, I don't know, your credit doesn't look good. And, they're bringing up, or they might actually say no. And you go back home. Of course, as a human being, you're disappointed. But you remember this is a principle. And you go into your room, you close the door, and in your mind, begin to imagine that thing again. And I tell you, sometimes it's immediate, sometimes 2-3 days, another door opens, because there are so many ways to get what we want. Sometimes you think, oh, it's going to the bank. It might not be. It might be a stranger you walk up to. It might be another bank. Maybe you went to the wrong bank, and the first bank was actually to give you information on what you needed, because you really don't know how to achieve that thing, right? So they'll ask you a couple of questions. Do you have this? Do you have it? Oh, you don't have it. Sorry, right? But the next time you're more prepared. So it's about changing your perspective and staying in the creation steadfastly and knowing that it's going to come. But yeah, it's so interesting that principle actually exists. Don't worry. Stay with the dream, and it will come to pass. Uche, do you have something to add to this?
Yes, I just wanted to you touch on what you were saying, and because of emotions, which is one thing, because most of the time, why do we do what we want? Why do we think that if we achieve it, we're going to be happy? So the emotion is joy, happy. If I do this, it's like success. You succeed in this, and and I'm going to be happy. So I came to that realization that being happy now gets you to your destination excellently. And it also started when I started meditating. After a while, I started noticing, because when you're meditating, your emotions, you're feeling the joy, the bliss, and then in the moments in the day, it starts to, like, I'm agreeing with you and I'm seconding what you said, it starts to resonate. So you start to, after a while, you start realizing that practicing your emotions, which is what I have personally, I'm exploring this and I'm working on this, practicing emotions, which is developing your palette for staying in higher emotions. Because if you have been reacting for years, and of course the world as in general, there are things to react to. You look around, there's this situation, things are not working, and this, and then, global this, there are many things to react to. And when you start to practice your emotions of joy and happiness and bliss, when you're happy, after a while, you start to build a palette. So when you start to practice these emotions more frequently, then you start to notice that you are no longer, because the external world has a lot of things to react to. If you're not doing this, then automatically you're more in the, like Junior, you said, the fear, the anxiety, the stress, this news, that news, this thing happened, that thing happened. But when you start to meditate and to get more joyful emotions, your palette broadens after a while. We practice. The longer you do it, in terms of staying and watching your thoughts and seeing how you react to situations and then staying there, after you do it for a while, it starts to get easier. You're moving. And within a moment, sometimes weeks, months, you start to notice that you have developed a broader palette for your emotions. So I think that's very interesting. What you were talking about, emotions are the reason we do this in the first place, because we think we're going to get something and be happy then. But we can be happy now by practicing it and then getting it easier and more effortlessly. We don't have to go through the anxiety and the fear to get it.
Right.
Yeah, amazing conclusions, and recognizing that these are principles. So Junior, please keep taking us along the journey. We're getting so many nuggets from it. Where you stopped was, you said that they were you noticed a pattern when you started to meditate.
Right. It's the pattern that I'm still trying to develop and goes from stage to stage. So the first thing that I noticed when I started meditating was, the calmness that you guys, you and Uche talked about. So initially you go from, and we don't even notice we're doing it. I didn't notice I was doing it, but I went from that constant state of mental agitation. I went from living in a constant state of anxiety because you think that life is all about solving problems and reacting to issues. When I initially started meditating, I went to a state of actually being able to be completely calm for short periods of time initially. So, and coming into a place where I would say to myself, you know what, this has to be done, that has to be done, but you know what, in this moment I really don't care, and in this moment I feel good, right? In this moment, this is who I am. I'm healthy. I like taking this breath in and out, and I enjoy this moment. That was the first thing. What I now started doing was taking that moment further, starting to go from just enjoying the moment to thinking about, okay, how can I use this moment more, and how can I expand this moment, right? How can I? Because even in the process of meditation, your mind still jumps, around. Your mind still is. For me, it's rare. For me, I still haven't got to the point where I can do a straight 10 minutes of being completely calm. Your mind still, finds something to fasten on, because that's what the mind does.
Right.
But you start going from just having that blank mind to meditating on something. So think, concentrating on the feeling of joy, or on the feeling of connection to God, or, a certain feeling. So your meditation goes, at least for me, it goes from just seeking calmness to striving for something even in the process of meditation. So, that connection with God, seeking that connection, whatever it means to me in that moment. And then taking that connection, if I find it in that particular instance of meditation, taking that connection and applying it to my life, that day, even if it's for 2 hours that day, before, the world takes over and you go back to your normal patterns, of reaction. But that's what it does for me. And how does that affect my life? Well, what I'm now finding is that, I think, like Uche mentioned, I now have a wider range of reaction to things. So here's one weird thing that I've noticed. Sometimes when I meditate and I actually let things, let the chips fall where they may in certain instances, guess what? The chips actually fall in instances that I didn't anticipate that they would fall, and they actually fall better than what I anticipated that would happen.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I find that, if I had interrupted the process, I might have made it worse. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, but I've noticed it enough times for it to be a thing. So you find that a lot of the things we worry about in life, most of them don't happen, right? And when they do happen, they don't happen as badly as we think that they would, that we've created in our minds that they would happen that way. And sometimes, it actually turns out better than what we thought it would be.
Yeah.
I think that, and I would like to say this. It occurred to me when we were talking, when you brought this back to how it applies to the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. A lot of Christians think that the whole, meditation process and, the kinds of things we talk about, manifestation and, when you're using your mind, a lot of Christians think, these things are wrong. And a lot of Christians, believe that, you follow the Bible blindly and, all the stuff that we grew up with. And the truth is that there is not one of these things that are against what the Bible says. In fact, like you pointed out, I think that the Bible wants us to develop our minds. The Bible wants us to ask questions and think through how we live our lives and what the Bible is actually saying.
Yeah.
And I believe these things are actually pro-Bible. You know, it's just difficult to explain to people. So I generally don't, unless unless you're, just like we're talking, unless you're open to discussions like this, because you just can't get anywhere with trying to explain this to people. But I just thought I would add that, because I had to overcome through the blockage, in my mind, between the Christian concepts and practical connection with God, which is what I think this is actually. So for a long time, I actually got to a point where I actually had a blockage and asked myself, these things that you're doing, are they biblical, right? Are you doing the right thing? Is this what God wants you to do? And thank God I did overcome it, but I did get to a point where there was a blockage, so I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you so much. Sir, Uche, please come in. Yes.
It was a very quick, because Junior, everything you're saying is resonating so much with me, because when you started off by saying that you were not practical, but practical, of course, we know that these are all concepts, practical in the way that we in Nigeria, the way it's looked at in general. But actually, I think, like you said, and I'm excited by the word you used when you said it's very practical application of having a close relationship with a connection with God. And it's because it's the most practical thing. All the steps you took were the steps of a very practical person. So when I also received the not practical aspect, at least growing up, I received that a lot. As the expression was, your eyes are on top. That's what they would say. Your eyes are up. So that I'm translating it from Igbo to English. But that aspect, the most practical aspect, is how you use it, which is dreaming and then getting there. Yes. Looking, saying, okay, this step forward, that's the most practical. And in these things, you were very practical, and that's the same way. These steps are the most practical way of having a connection, a relationship, conversations with God, in my own experience and opinion too. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, amazing. This is our third nugget, and I'm going to summarize at the end of it. But it is that we were created by God. I learned the word source, and I love that word because it just tells me that, we're not random things that just appeared. We actually have someone that created us, that empowers us, that is always looking to help us, to guide us. It's like, when you connect your light to the power, that's where my power is. And I choose, do I want to stay connected to it or not? And so when you said, when I meditate, I'm generally making my decisions from a place of joy, and I begin to have a wider palette of reactions. Thank you, Uche, for that. I love that. I'm going to use that now from now on. And that when you make decisions from that place, that higher self place, you are surprised at what happens. And that's where source takes over, because you see, even though we're creators, God is within us, and he wants to express himself through us in different ways. And that's why we're all so different from each other, right? And so when we initiate that connection, our reactions are not from a place of fear, worry, anxiety. They come from our higher self. They're actually coming from God. They're coming straight from him. They're filled with love. They're filled with joy. And when I say joy, I don't mean you're dancing around laughing. Some people think that's what it means. No. Sometimes joy is stability, calmness, appreciation. These are different variations of it. And when your decisions come from that place, well, what you're thinking about or giving out is what comes back to you. And so your outside world begins to express differently, and the things that happen will now happen through the power of your source, through the power of God within you. And then that's when those miracles happen. That's when people who have been against your idea or whatever it is suddenly come around and say, okay. And you're like, huh? How did that happen? And I love when those things happen. Developing your mind is connection with God, because God gave us our minds. He made us different from every animal in the kingdom. And it is our logic, our ability to reason that makes us different. If he gave it to us, then he definitely wants us to develop it, because he never wastes anything. Everything in the earth is always evolving over time. So these are valuable, but I just love this conversation. So I wanted to just, because we're kind of running out of time, but can you give us an example or something that you've realized was very helpful in moving things from where they are negative to where they become positive? And I think this is very an important skill. We've touched upon it in different ways, but if you could just share with us maybe an experience. But even if it's a general concept, if you have a specific, that's great. But a general concept, how do we transmute things that are really not working in our favor, or things that we've been working on for a long time, and we're doing one step forward, two steps backwards on that particular thing? How do we change something that is negative, expressing itself constantly in our lives?
I think that what I've done, and what seems to work, is two things. One thing is actually coming to the point where you realize that a certain thing is consistently negative. So that's step number one, right? So to give an example, when, for instance, I realized that I had actually developed a pattern in my career, my corporate America career, right?
Right.
And I actually I did not have a problem with finding jobs with Fortune 500, really good jobs with Fortune 500 companies, jobs that other people would struggle to find. I never had that problem. Where I had the problem was when I would get into the organization, and the pattern was actually very definite. I would spend a couple of years in the organization, and it always took about around 2 years for the negative, the things to manifest.
Right.
So I would either have a situation where I would find myself being underutilized in a position, or I would, start butting heads with my superiors, and I don't absolve myself of, the whatever problems, whatever it is I was working out in my life and in my mind, but it wasn't, it wasn't always just me. It would, there were always problems, and it would invariably lead to an overreaction on either my part or on the part of the superior, and I would find myself having to leave the organization. So that I just use that as an example of a native pattern that I figured out that I had developed, and it actually took me a while to come to the point of realization that this had become a pattern. Because the first time it happens, or a couple of times it happens, you focus on the situation itself, and you blame it on, it was just Mr. Bob or Mr. whatever, or it was just, and you don't see the wider pattern. So the first thing is being able to recognize the pattern in your life and to come to terms with the fact that it's a pattern.
Right.
Okay. When you get to that point, what do you then do? You have two choices. You can run at, you can react to it the way that you normally do, which the way I always reacted to these issues was to fight the problem. Throw myself at it and, see whatever it is that was causing the issue as an obstacle. So if it was the organization, I would set out to change the organization, which usually didn't end well.
Right.
If it was an individual, I would set out to resist that individual with everything in my power, which usually didn't end well, considering that the individual was usually my superior. So when things started changing was when I started learning how to set things aside. So instead of running at the problem, it's not initially. I resisted this for so long because I saw it as maybe being a defeatist attitude, So I would look at myself and I'd say, well, that's the coward's way of approaching a problem is avoiding the problem, but it's not avoidance. What I started learning how to do is to set the problem aside for a while. So instead of, again, the easiest thing to do is to illustrate it. Instead of trying to change the organization or resisting the individual with everything you have, say, well, okay, I recognize that this is a problem. I recognize I'm not happy with the way things are happening. But you know what? I'm going to go into work for the next month and not actually think about the problem as a problem. Not actually think about the problem, period. So, when the individual approaches you and they say, and they come at you with daggers drawn and they expect the normal reaction, so I want you to do this. You would say, okay, if that's what you want me to do, I'll go ahead. And it's not a passive aggressive thing. Actually, it's easier said than done, but actually just go ahead and find out from the person, look, is this what you want done? How do you want it done? Let me know so I can do it well for you.
Right.
So you're not avoiding the problem, right? The problem is still there, but you're setting it aside, right, for a while and seeing if the process of setting it aside, and a critical part of this process is actually in your mind coming to terms with the fact that you're setting it aside. So when you're accepting to do that task for that person, not in your mind saying you a-hole, so genuinely saying, you know what, I'm setting this problem aside. I'm setting this problem between us aside. So, I really want to do this task and let the chips fall where they may, So I find that, what I found was when I started thinking that way, just like Uche had said, the palette of reactions expanded. So what I found this process of setting it aside was my palette, expanded. So when I set it aside, I now started thinking to myself, you know what? Life doesn't end in corporate America. I now started, so I would now go into work completely devoid of that feeling of tension. I would do whatever I needed to do happily, at least as happily as I could. But at the same time, I started thinking, you know what? It's actually not undoable for me to have my own business. It's actually not, I could now confront the big specter of, the fear of living without a corporate America paycheck, because I was just coming at it from a whole different perspective.
Right.
So it's things like that. That's what's worked for me. Yeah.
Amazing. I just love that. Before I share my opinion on that, Uche, do you want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I'm very glad that you came on today because, again, another nugget, the creativity, again, the creation, because when you step inside you, in your mind, then you were able to, when you stepped inside you were able to now do more than being in this job that you had to do this, and you were able to go into the space where you were like, I should be doing this myself, and I'm to do this myself better than to be here. So that was, again, a creative expansion. So so I'm very excited that you came on today because you've given us so many nuggets in this short conversation.
Well, super. So that's us for this week. Thank you so much, Junior. We call him Junior, but really his name is Jerome Okolo. He has a law chambers in Nebraska, Omaha. If you ever need legal help, personal injury, workers' compensation, juvenile and family law, general business litigation, please contact him. You can call his office. It's 402-502-0512. Junior, thank you so much for sharing your journey, the things that have helped you in your journey. Hopefully we'll be able to connect with you again so you can leave us with deeper wisdom. It's always great to hear from someone who's worked the journey and who has succeeded, where, I know you say, well, you're still working towards something, but from...
When my sister, working the journey and succeeding. But
Perfect.
This has been a lot of fun, and thanks a lot, Chi. Thanks a lot, Uche. And I look forward to more conversations.
Super. And so I'll sign off with: remember to meditate, make your decisions from a place of joy. This creates a wider palette of reactions and emotions. Let God be God in your life, because when you do that, you're connected to Him, and He will begin to express Himself through you. And magical things, these are where the miracles begin to happen. And keep developing your mind. Don't be afraid. Go into those areas of your mind, those patterns that you think are, set in stone. They're not. They're just things you keep thinking. And you can choose any day you want. Choose another thought. Choose a thought of joy. Choose a thought of peace. Thank you so much for listening. We'll connect with you again next week.
Thanks. Bye.
This message is sponsored by Amazon.
I want to get back to kissing the cheeks of my grandbabies, making Sunday dinner with a house full of family and lots of laughs.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel, but now there are vaccines. It's okay to have questions. Now get the facts. Visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision about COVID-19 vaccines. It's up to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Feel the rush again at Busch Gardens. It's time for the excitement of electrifying events like Summer Nights, June 25th to July 29th. Stay late for nightly fireworks and all new weekend concerts. It all tastes better with the refreshing taste of ice-cold Coca-Cola at Busch Gardens. Right now, tickets start at just $32 a day. Restrictions apply.